Hello, my dear Catholic homeschooling friends. I had hoped that this year I would be out on the road, different cities and conferences, meeting many of you in person, but alas, it was not to be. A very different year indeed. However, the silver lining is that we can do these virtual events and we have an opportunity perhaps to reach even more people and share both the good news of the gospel and the good news of homeschooling. We at Institute for Excellence in Writing have been experiencing a lot of interest in homeschooling among parents who aren't sure whether they'll be able to send their children back to schools in the fall or not, as well as parents who have come to realize some of the hidden benefits of helping children learn at home. I am Andrew Pudewa. I am the director of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, and I am very privileged to be able to offer you this short talk on fairy tales and the moral imagination. This is a subject close to my heart, as I did not grow up in a Christian home. We were culturally Christian, but our family religion was sailing. So every weekend when the weather was good, which was almost all the weekends in Southern California where I lived, we would be out on our sailboat, and I spent a lot of time in nature, but I very rarely went to a church. And so as a young man, I got into kind of a new agey religion, and it wasn't until my mid-30s that I found Christ, and then finally several years after that was able to be received into the Catholic Church. One of the things I have reflected on, though, is in addition to the tremendous grace of faith and the benefit of that to me, of course, what were the seeds? How was it that my soul responded to the gospel message? And I identified two things. One, time in nature, and the other is my reading. I went to school and I read books in school, as everyone does, but I have no memory of any of the books that I read in school. I do have a great memory of my own bookshelf in my own room, which contained mostly the encyclopedia, the World Book Encyclopedia, and the fairy tales. I had a large collection of fairy tales, and that, along with Tolkien, for many years, I just read them again and again and again. And I had this interesting realization one day. I was in a different city. I was sitting in a church waiting for things to begin. And it was one of these kind of more modern churches, and they had banners along the wall, these kind of banners, not my particular style of artwork, but they had little pictures and icons and sayings. And one of the banners said, "Christ the King." And I looked at that banner, and I thought, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't instinctively act positively to this idea, Christ the King. And I started to feel very guilty about that. And then I started to wonder why. What is my problem there? And then I flashed on it, and I thought, well, I'm an American. Our whole country was founded on the idea that we get out from under the authority of a king. And all of our textbooks and social studies and history were pretty much all about the march of progress is to get rid of kings and replace them with democracies, and that's what's good. And so the American person, the American part of me, was thinking, well, that's why I don't like the idea of having a king. But then I noticed something. Underneath that, I loved the idea of king. In fact, secretly, almost guiltily, I would like to live in a monarchy. I was thinking once, if I could go to Monaco or someplace where they still have a king, or even Canada where they have a queen. There's something very attractive about that. And then, of course, I started to feel guilty about it. And I thought, well, this is very complex, these thoughts and emotions. I want to love Christ as a king, and I can. And where did that come from? And I flashed on it, fairy tales. You see, in fairy tales, you find out the truth about kingness. You don't find that out from textbooks. And, even in the Bible, a lot of the kings were not so good. But in fairy tales, the truth of kingness is revealed, that a king loves his people, and the people should love their king. And that's the proper order of things. A king makes sacrifices for his people, and the people make sacrifices for their king. And if there is an evil king, he should be deposed, but he is to be replaced with not a democracy, but with the true king. And this got me interested in a study of fairy tales. I bought half a dozen different books on fairy tales. I'm going to mention a couple of them if you want to walk down the same path I have walked. And it's been a great joy for me to contemplate the value of fairy tales in cultivating, and other children's literature, classic children's literature, in cultivating the moral imagination. And what is that moral imagination? Well, as we are raising our children and educating them at home and guiding their reading and reading to them, we want to be thinking, what effect does this story have on the imagination the child has, in terms of the child thinking, do I want to be like that? Should I be like that? Could I be like that? Would I do that? Could I do that? Should I do that in those circumstances? These are all questions that literature raises for us. And it's such a blessed opportunity to bring kind of a core goodness to our children. And I think that's what I got as I sat in my room when I was probably 10, 11, 12, 13, just reading, those same fairy tales. I had the Andrew Lang edited series, the yellow fairy tale book, the blue fairy tale book, the red fairy tale. I had the whole set. And I just read them again and again and again. So I wanted to, bring up this idea with you. I like to quote Chesterton on this. I think this is one of the best. He, of course, wrote a delightful essay called The Ethics of Elfland, and this was part of his book Orthodoxy. It can also be had online just as a PDF, very easy. The Ethics of Elfland, G.K. Chesterton. But Chesterton said, paraphrasing here, we don't read fairy tales to children so that they know that dragons exist. Children already know that dragons exist. We read them fairy tales so that they learn that dragons can be slain. And that's the imagination. His poem also, the death of the hunting of the dragon, the death of the deathless dragon. That is the life of a man. So I began this study, and one of the things I came across was, I think, a very helpful little paradigm for us to evaluate stories and movies and literature. Came from a friend of mine, Oliver DeMille. He wrote a book called Leadership Education, which had a good impact on me. But he brought this to me in a talk he gave, and I have contemplated it very much. He talks about 4 types of stories. Types. And of course, there are stories that are hybrids, that are mixed. But if you understand the type, it helps from an analytical point of view. And that's what we're called to do, is to think clearly about our literature. So these 4 types of stories are whole stories, healing stories, broken stories, and twisted stories. Whole, healing, broken, and twisted. So let's unpack this a little bit. Whole stories are stories where good is good, bad is bad. It's clear. It's clear. It's the child's first morality play. There's no ambiguity about who's good and who's evil. It's clear, and good wins. We love these stories. We crave these stories. We want to be constantly reminded that in the end, no matter how bad or dangerous or tough or difficult or hopeless things get or seem, in the end, good wins. we love to have this reaffirmed because it is, of course, a reflection of the truth. We know who wins in the end, but we have to get there. So we're very attracted to this. Examples all throughout children's literature and fairy tales. Cinderella is one of the oldest stories that you'll come across. There's a version of it in almost every culture. The innocent, oppressed good suffers but has an opportunity, and then the evil in there that is oppressing them is overcome through grace, through often supernatural intercession, through goodness. And so, we just love this story. What's the attraction of superhero movies? Why are young people so interested in Superman and Batman and all of those? I'm not a current aficionado of superhero movies, but I certainly know young people are en masse. Well, it's because good is good, evil is evil, and good wins. In fact, I think the whole superhero idea kind of had to be born in America because we are essentially a Protestant nation in our founding culturally. The early Puritans and Protestants really rejected the cult of the saints. So without saint stories for children to contemplate the supernatural goodness that wins in the end, we need to replace that. We need heroes. So we have superheroes and sports stars. But there's a place for the fairy tale kind of in between all that. One of the best books, I believe, that you can find is by Vigen Guroian, and he wrote a book called Tending the Heart of Virtue. And he writes all about children's literature and fairy tales in particular, in how they become a contemplation of the good. There's much more that could be said, and for young children, of course, almost all the stories we read them, we want them to be whole stories. Good is good, bad is bad. It's clear, and good wins. Now, the next type or category here that we're talking about would be healing stories. Healing stories are stories where good is good, bad is bad, and good doesn't win in the way you expect, but there is redemption. There's healing. Things don't work out exactly the way you want them to, but there's a goodness, and maybe even a greater goodness that results. Probably the best two to illustrate this are both by Hans Christian Andersen. One is The Little Mermaid, and if you haven't read the original Little Mermaid, you must do so immediately just to disabuse yourself of the Disney distortion of it. But in the original, the Little Mermaid does not get the prince. In fact, another girl gets the prince, and she wants to marry the prince, but she has has traded her tongue to the sea witch for the ability to walk on land and be with him. So she hangs out with him and she adores him, and he keeps her around kind of as a pet, while he's in love with this other girl who he thought was the one that saved him. And it ends up that she has now lost the chance to marry him because he marries this other girl. And if she doesn't marry a mortal, then she cannot attain an immortal soul. But if she does marry a mortal, then the two become one, and she gains an immortal soul as a result of that. Her life will be shorter, but her eternal life will be a possibility. So in that story, it's very sacramental, just dripping with the supernatural sacramental nature of marriage. She doesn't. She's given the opportunity to end his life, thereby preserving her own, which will only last for 300 years, and then she dissolves into foam on the water. But she doesn't. She throws the knife, the magic knife, in the ocean. She says, I will not. I love him. I will give up my existence to save him. And as she begins to dissolve into foam on the water, she is lifted up by the invisible spirits of the air who minister to mankind. And they say, because of this act of selfless love, you are now given the opportunity to join us, invisible spirits of the air, and serve mankind faithfully for 300 years. And if you do, you can attain an immortal soul. I mean, what if Disney had made that movie? It's incredible. So she doesn't get what the prince, she doesn't get the worldly happiness, but there is redemption, there is healing, because she now has an opportunity to serve and gain eternal happiness. Another story, Hans Christian Andersen, I can hardly even think about it without crying anymore, is The Little Match Seller. And the little girl it's New Year's Eve, and she's freezing to death, and she loses a shoe, and she has to sell matches or she'll be beat when she comes home. And so she lights one match just for a moment of warmth. She lights another. All the matches are lit, and with each match being lit, the wall near her becomes translucent, transparent, and she sees her grandmother, and essentially kind of the beatific vision. And then the last thing in the story is they find her frozen, stiff body on the street, and you're just like, she died. He killed her, but not quite. He didn't quite kill her. He showed the truth. Yes, she didn't live through and have a happy life, but she was received into eternal life. So these stories are just very powerful. There are more healing stories, but we need to move on and talk a little bit about broken stories. Broken stories are where good is good and bad is bad, and it's clear only bad wins. A good example of this story is probably Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where good is good, bad is bad, and the bad wins in the end. And the only solution is the death of the character. Why? Because he made bad choice after bad choice after bad choice. Now, what's the value of reading this, and when should a story like this be read and discussed? Well, certainly not with young children. My son accidentally listened to this story on audio at too young of an age. And when I mentioned the story, it was a long time after he'd listened to it, he said, I hated that story. I said, oh, why did you hate it? He goes, nothing good happens. So why read a story where nothing good happens? Well, it's where we can see the consequences of sin. We see the consequences of evil. We see the consequences of addiction and wrong decisions and behavior that leads ultimately to not just death, but even the loss of eternal life. So the broken stories should be read probably with older students coming into adulthood, starting to wrestle with some of those things that we all do have to wrestle with in terms of the attractiveness of sin. And we need to have the right conversation along with that. Twisted stories, this is the last genre. These are stories where it's not clear. Good is not necessarily good, evil is not necessarily evil. It's kind of hard to tell. Or worse, good is portrayed as evil and evil is portrayed as good, the glorification of evil. There were a whole lot of stories or books like this prior to, say, the last half century or so. Probably the first one to get any traction at all was A Clockwork Orange. There were movies like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and now, of course, it's much more prevalent. We have things like 50 Shades of Grey that are clearly distorting, twisting the reality that there is good and there is evil. And it's all just relative. So it's relativism in literature. So we want to be very careful. I am needing to wrap this up, but I want to point out a couple more books for you in case you want to do some of the reading that I did. One very, very important and useful book for me was called Landscape with Dragons by the Catholic author, Canadian Catholic author Michael O'Brien. Many of you know him from his Father Elijah series or Voyage to Alpha Centauri. Michael O'Brien talks in that book about archetypes, obviously starting with the idea of a dragon. What is that supposed to represent? What does it represent in our psyche? And then what happens when you twist that and a dragon is no longer what its archetype is meant to be. And so that's very useful. And then the last book is my favorite. So if you only buy one book, if you only read one book about children's literature, it would be this one, The Mysteries of Life in Children's Literature by Mitchell Kalkapagian, a Catholic professor of literature, a great man, passed on last year, I believe. I got a chance to meet him a couple times, and I just love this book. And he talks about, the mysteries and themes that children have to wrestle with: greed and abandonment, the mystery of beauty, wishes. There's a marvelous section on wishes and why wishes really do come true. And of course, hospitality, kindness, and ultimately, the value of life. And how many fairy tales I remember reading that would start out something like this. Once upon a time, there was a man and his wife, and what they wanted more than anything else was a child. And that affirming of children and family and the goodness and the simplicity of that life, we can embrace that, and we can try to build ours and our children's moral imagination in a very simple way. What does it mean to pursue the good life? And so much of that is built into the good and great stories and the good and great books in our Christian Western tradition. So I wish I had more time. I wish I was there with you in person to maybe have a conversation with some questions, hear what you think about that. But I hope this has been helpful for you. If you are interested in what we do at the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or would like to hear more talks or read stuff that I have written, or maybe get one of our writing courses for your homeschool, please do visit our website at IEW.com, and you can learn all more about me and what we do. So thank you very much. God bless you.